I've spent well over 100 hours testing every aspect of the S23, S24, and S25 Ultra in a dozen categories to see if the Galaxy S25 Ultra is actually worth the upgrade, and I guarantee you'll know for sure by the end of this video. Taking a look at the physical differences between these devices, we can see that the S25 Ultra does have some significant changes, certainly more than the S24 Ultra had over the S23 Ultra. For starters, we have much more prominent camera rings that are not only wider, but they also stick up further off the back of the phone. That said, Zach from Jerry Rig Everything did figure out that these are indeed just caps instead of actually being any meaningful change. That means you could buy your own set of protective caps and just stick them on your S23 or S24 Ultra and get a really similar look. Besides the camera bezel changes, Samsung also made the sides of the Galaxy S25 Ultra completely flat. For reference, both the S23 and S24 Ultra had pretty rounded edges. The corners on the S25 Ultra are also significantly more rounded than the corners on the S24 and S23 Ultra. And this does make a noticeable difference in comfort with the corner pressing into your hand when you're holding the phone. The corner of the S24 and S23 Ultra just dig into your hand a bit. The last big physical difference is that the screen is now completely flat on the Galaxy S25 Ultra. And this is a huge improvement because when you put this in a case, the sides of the case are actually going to come up above the screen so you get better protection. The S23 Ultra had a very curved screen, so when you put it in a case, you had barely any edge protection at all. The S24 Ultra had a flatter display, but it was still curved enough that when you put a case on it, the edges weren't that protected. And as you can see in this side-by-side, it's a really significant difference. Looking at the bottom of the devices, we do see some changes year over year. The speaker grill on the S23 Ultra started with a bunch of holes, then it moved to a slit on the S24 Ultra, and then a larger slit on the S25 Ultra. The SIM ejector hole also moved to the other side on the S25 Ultra as well. Another big difference in the materials is that the S23 Ultra had an aluminum frame that was super glossy and a huge fingerprint magnet. The S24 Ultra was the first one to introduce a titanium frame and more of a matte finish on the sides, so it didn't collect fingerprints nearly as much. And Samsung continued using a titanium frame with the S25 Ultra as well, again with a very fingerprint resistant finish. Even Samsung's shiny silver finish on the S25 Ultra doesn't collect fingerprints at all. And in case you're wondering, the two S25 Ultra colors I have here are the jet black and the silver blue. The jet black is my personal favorite, especially with those blacked out sides, and the silver blue is honestly just mostly silver. If you get it in just the right light, there might be a tiny bit of blue there, but it's basically just a silver phone. Although I will say that the silver color does give the illusion of thinner bezels compared to the black color, so if that matters to you, silver might be a better pick. Taking a look at the buttons, we can see that the S23 Ultra had flatter buttons, and when I push on these, they're certainly a lot less tactile on the S23 Ultra versus the S24 Ultra and S25 Ultra. The S25 Ultra and S24 Ultra are super similar in how tactile the buttons feel, and the only real difference is that the power button is slightly larger on the S25 Ultra versus the S24 Ultra. When it comes to weight, the S23 Ultra weighs in at 238 grams, the S24 Ultra weighs in marginally lighter at 236 grams, and the S25 Ultra comes in notably lighter at 222 grams. Now the big question is whether or not you can tell the difference when you're holding the phones, and it's kind of a mixed bag. Personally, I can't really tell the difference in weight no matter which two phones I'm holding. They feel pretty much the same to me. It's only if I really sit there and think about it that I kind of realize that the S25 Ultra is a little bit lighter than the other two, but it's not something I'd immediately notice just by picking it up. My wife, on the other hand, immediately knew that the S25 Ultra was lighter when she picked it up. And I've read in the comments on previous videos of mine that some of you were also able to tell the difference in weight as well. So maybe my senses for weight are just super awful and you can tell the difference. But let me know in the comments below if you've held an S25 Ultra and could tell the difference. I'm really curious to see what most of you guys think. Taking a closer look at the S Pens, the clickiness of each S Pen feels exactly the same on all three devices, but the backs of them do look slightly different. And besides the color differences and a slightly thicker top piece on the S25 Ultra's S Pen, they all look pretty much identical. But just because they look identical doesn't mean they are, because the S25 Ultra S Pen no longer has the Bluetooth functionality that came on both the S23 and S24 Ultra's S Pens. But we'll talk more about that a bit later in this video. The bezels shrink down considerably on the S25 Ultra as well. This allows the phone to have a 6.9-inch display versus the 6.8-inch display on the two previous devices and be in a smaller form factor at the same time. Protecting these displays is Gorilla Glass Victus 2 on the S23 Ultra, Gorilla Armor on the S24 Ultra, and Gorilla Armor 2 on the S25 Ultra. The big takeaway here is Gorilla Glass Victus 2 scratched pretty easily on the S23 Ultra. This thing's actually covered in scratches. But Gorilla Armor on the S24 Ultra was a massive upgrade, and after a full year of use with the S24 Ultra, I have literally 0 scratches on that phone. The S25 Ultra should take the durability a bit further with Gorilla Armor 2. Future me here, after doing a bit more research, I found that Gorilla Armor 2 is more about shatter resistance, and you actually lose a little bit of scratch resistance on the Galaxy S25 Ultra versus the S24 Ultra. In fact, I personally already have a little bit of scratching on the bottom right corner of my S25 Ultra. But also keep in mind that in order to do my tests, I need to often stack the phones kind of like this, and that's going to make the lenses from one of the cameras touch the glass on another phone. So it is possible that some of that clanking around did cause that little scratch in the corner, which is certainly not typical use for a smartphone, but I figured it was worth pointing out. A bit earlier in the video, I mentioned how the S24 and S25 Ultra have titanium frames versus the aluminum frame on the S23 Ultra. While titanium is certainly a nice upgrade, it's not going to make a significant difference in durability. It does help the phones achieve their slightly lighter weight, but that's about it in my opinion. A massive display change that Samsung first introduced with the S24 Ultra was an anti-reflective layer. So if I turn both of these phones into the light, you'll see that the S23 Ultra screen gets completely washed out and entirely unusable when it hits the light. But the S24 Ultra screen is still plenty visible. Samsung continues to use that anti-reflective layer on the S25 Ultra, but there doesn't seem to be any improvements to it, it's just the same anti-reflectivity. When it comes to screen quality, all 3 phones have a dynamic AMOLED 2X display, and they're all capable of QHD plus resolution, but the S24 and 25 Ultra do have a tiny bit more resolution than the S23 Ultra. But that's going to be entirely negligible, and there's no way you're going to notice that. Something you will notice is the maximum brightness between these 3 devices. The S23 Ultra has a peak brightness of about 1750 nits, whereas the S24 and S25 Ultra have a peak brightness of 2600 nits. That is a massive difference, and when you couple that with the anti-reflective display, both the S24 and S25 Ultra are significantly easier to see in bright sunlight compared to the S23 Ultra. Taking a look at how these displays perform with some HDR content, we see that the S23 and S24 Ultra look pretty much the same in terms of colors, but the S24 and S25 Ultra are noticeably brighter, which is to be expected with their upgraded screens. Surprisingly, the S25 Ultra is significantly more vibrant. In some cases, it makes the video look better, but in other cases, it's a bit too much vibrance. Fortunately, you can always jump into the display settings, then scroll down a bit and tap screen mode, and switch it from vivid to natural. And this makes the colors look pretty similar across all 3 devices. But if you prefer those really vibrant colors, that's only going to be possible on the S25 Ultra. Now let's do a speaker test. To my ears, the S24 Ultra was a bit louder and fuller than the S23 Ultra, but the S25 Ultra was noticeably louder and fuller than both of these, and it was definitely a bigger upgrade from the S24 Ultra to the S25 Ultra versus the 23 to the 24. But let me know in the comments down below if you guys noticed anything else. Now it's time for the performance test, starting with video exports, and all 3 devices have been fully charged to 100% before starting this test. So let's go ahead and get the export started. And if I tap quality settings here, you'll see that all 3 videos are going to export to 4K resolution. Let's see how they do. While this test is running, I want to point out that the test video is the exact same video on all 3 devices. It's a 15-minute long video that was filmed with a Sony FX3, edited in Premiere Pro, and exported in H.264 format. And since they all have the exact same effects applied, this is as fair of a comparison as we can get. Now these are honestly pretty surprising results. Like, I knew the S25 Ultra would be the fastest, but I didn't know it would be that much faster than the previous 2 devices. So if you do a lot of video editing on your phone, the S25 Ultra is going to be a noticeable upgrade over the S24 Ultra, and it's going to be a dramatic upgrade over the S23 Ultra. Now that this test is complete, let's move on to our next test, which is going to be a 3D Mark test. And specifically, we're going to be testing the ray tracing performance between all three devices. So let's go ahead and run this test now. Hopefully you guys can see this in the video, but right off the bat, it's super clear that the S23 Ultra is stuttering like crazy trying to get through this test. The S24 Ultra is noticeably smoother than the S23 Ultra, but it's still not as smooth as the S25 Ultra. Looking at the results, we see an appreciable increase in performance on the S25 Ultra versus the S24 Ultra, and a massive increase in performance over the S23 Ultra. So if you're big into gaming, or you do any ray-traced gaming at all, the S25 Ultra is going to be a massive upgrade from the S23 Ultra or any previous device. The next test is going to look at the thermal performance of all three devices, so I'm going to need to let these cool off for a minute before I start that test. Now that they've cooled off a little bit, I checked their temperatures with my little thermometer, and I've got about 75 degrees for all three of them. Now we're going to start a stress test and see how they perform. And this stress test is going to run through that exact same sequence that you guys saw a minute ago 20 times. Checking the temperatures about halfway through the test, we get about 101 degrees on the S23 Ultra, 109 degrees on the S24 Ultra, and about 108 degrees on the S25 Ultra. We're now at the very end of the test, and we have the S23 Ultra at 111 degrees, the S24 Ultra at almost 110 degrees, and the S25 Ultra at about 109 degrees. Alright, we've finished the test, and wow, these devices are so hot to the touch. That's crazy. Something that's really interesting to see with these final results is that while the S23 Ultra had the worst overall performance by a pretty significant margin, it was at least consistent with that with a stability of 92%. The S24 Ultra was significantly less stable. If you look at the trend over time, the longer the test ran, the worse the performance got. And this is also true for the S25 Ultra. So the key takeaway here is that if you're doing some really processor-intensive gaming for extended periods of time, the performance improvements on the S25 Ultra do start to diminish compared to the S24 Ultra. If we look at the loops, you can see that the S25 Ultra does consistently stay faster than the S24 Ultra, but it's not quite as much the longer you game. Interestingly, the battery loss throughout the test is about the same between all three devices, which is pretty impressive considering you're getting way more performance out of the S25 Ultra versus the S23 Ultra. After letting the phones cool down again, it's time to run the CPU benchmark. The single-core results are good, but it's not a dramatic difference between the devices, though the multi-score is almost twice as high as the multi-score on the S23 Ultra, which is pretty good. But when it comes to everyday use like opening and closing applications and just using basic applications in general, you're probably not going to notice too much of a difference between any of these devices, with the obvious exception being gaming. And interestingly, after all of these processor-intensive tests, the battery drain has been similar across all three devices. So if you're constantly pushing these devices to the max, you're probably not going to see the biggest battery life improvement with the Galaxy S25 Ultra. But the next battery drain test may change these results pretty significantly. And that test is a media consumption test where I played about an hour and a half of a chosen episode and nearly 5 hours of the same YouTube videos on all three devices. And after those tests, it's pretty clear that media consumption uses far less battery on the S24 Ultra and S25 Ultra compared to the S23 Ultra. So generally speaking, I think it's safe to say that the S25 Ultra is going to have better battery life than the S23 Ultra and older devices. But compared to the S24 Ultra, both of these devices have pretty much the same battery life in all tests. But regardless, with almost 8 hours of screen on time on all three of these devices, and with the S23 Ultra still having 16% left, I think it's safe to say that it doesn't matter which one of these devices you have, you're going to get a full day's worth of battery. For the charge speed test, I drained all three devices down to 2%, then plugged them into a super fast charging 2.0 charger, which is the fastest charging you can get on these devices. And I used the exact same charger for each phone and even waited a full day in between charges to make sure that the charger itself was completely cooled off before charging the next phone. So here are the results. After just 30 minutes of charging, the S23 and S24 Ultra were neck and neck with their charge speeds, and the S25 Ultra takes a significant lead, charging all the way to 74% in just those 30 minutes. The S25 Ultra then finished charging at 56 minutes. Meanwhile, the S23 and S24 Ultra didn't quite make it to 100% by the hour mark, and they finished charging at about 109 minutes each. So it's great to see that we're finally starting to get at least a little bit faster charging. Now we're going to talk about the camera quality between these devices, starting with the specs, then we'll take a look at some samples. So starting with the S23 Ultra, we get a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 200 megapixel wide camera, and two 10 megapixel sensors for the 3x and 10x zoom cameras. The S24 Ultra has the exact same cameras as the S23 Ultra, with the exception of the 10x zoom camera, which gets upgraded to a 50 megapixel sensor, but it's also downgraded to just 5x zoom. So we'll see how this plays out in the camera tests. The S25 Ultra gets an upgraded 50 megapixel ultra wide camera, but the rest of the cameras are the same as the S24 Ultra. And all three of these phones have the same 12 megapixel sensor for the front-facing camera. So those are all the specs, but how do these cameras actually compare? Let's take a look. Starting with the ultra-wide camera, since that's the new one, the differences are surprisingly small when it comes to macro photos. The difference in detail in the snowmen simply comes down to slight differences in how close the cameras were to the snowman in the picture. Switching to a macro photo of a Hot Wheels car, we start to see a bit of a difference, but it's only with the image processing. The S23 Ultra surprisingly has more true-to-life colors with a fully white box. The S24 and S25 Ultra add a reddish tint that's not actually there. The S23 Ultra is also over-sharpened, while the other two are a bit too soft. Switching to a 50 megapixel macro shot on the S25 Ultra surprisingly gives us more accurate colors and adds a bit of sharpness back in. Where the 50 megapixel sensor actually comes in handy is for landscape photos where you want to capture as much detail as possible and you want to zoom in on the photo later. As you can see when I zoom in on this photo, the S25 Ultra has significantly more detail with its 50 megapixel image. But you should know that if you're just taking 12 megapixel photos with all three cameras, you're not going to see too much of a difference here. This next photo is to test the dynamic range of the cameras. Basically, I'm trying to see how well each camera captures both the really bright and dark areas of a photo at the same time. Right off the bat, we see that the S23 Ultra is too bright and has a significant haze from the bright light. The S24 Ultra is less bright, but still has a good amount of haze, and the S25 Ultra has even less haze, making the keyboard letters a bit more defined. Switching to the 1x zoom camera, then punching in on the car, we can see that the colors getting lost on the S23 Ultra, and the front end of the car has been way over sharpened.
Oops, too much.
Meanwhile, the S24 and S25 Ultra look pretty comparable here with slight shifts in color and a brighter back end of the car on the S24 Ultra. Stepping through the zoom levels gives us some really interesting results. Starting at 3x zoom, the S23 Ultra almost completely removes the white spots towards the top of the berries. Meanwhile, the S24 Ultra turns the saturation up to 11, making the berries appear more red than they actually are in real life. And the S25 Ultra is the most true to life in this picture. When we pop into 5x zoom, the S23 Ultra overcompensates for removing the white spots in the last picture and makes them too bright in this one. Meanwhile, the S25 Ultra got jealous of the S24 Ultra's oversaturated colors and turned its saturation up to 12. At 10x zoom, saturation gets way out of hand. I'm just kidding, guys. This is what it actually looks like. The S23 Ultra is still making the whites a bit too bright, and the other two phones are still competing for saturation. And at 30x zoom, the differences become a bit less dramatic. The takeaway here is that Samsung seems to be pretty inconsistent with how they're processing photos, especially with really vibrant colors like these berries. Although both the S24 and S25 Ultra do seem to handle it a bit better than the S23 Ultra. To test the 100x zoom capabilities on each phone, I need to get a lot further back from the object. You probably can't see it, but there is a sign right here. Zooming into 10x, you can start to see the sign, but zooming into 100x lets you read the sign. And this is where we see some significant differences. The S24 Ultra looks smudgy because that was the first year that Samsung switched from a 10x zoom telephoto lens to a 5x zoom lens. Now that Samsung's had another year to work on their photo algorithms, they've been able to get the S25 Ultra to surpass the quality of the S23 Ultra. And here's another side-by-side shot to really drive home the differences. The selfie camera differences are bigger than I thought. The S23 Ultra still seems to be over-sharpening a bit and adds a yellowish tint to my face. The S24 Ultra seems a bit too soft and could go with a bit more sharpening. The S25 Ultra does have a pretty appropriate amount of sharpening, and it significantly increases the contrast of the image. Overall, I think the S25 Ultra produces the clearest image, but let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Switching to portrait mode with the front-facing cameras, we get similar color and contrast differences as with the last test, and the background blur is pretty similar across all three phones. The rear camera portrait mode shows some bigger differences. The S23 Ultra has much less background blur and doesn't have any roll-off to the blur on my head or body. The S24 and S25 Ultra do add some roll-off on my ears and right shoulder, which would be your left looking at the screen, and this roll-off makes the blur look a whole lot more natural. The new ultra-wide camera really stretches its legs when we take a look at some night photos. The S23 Ultra has a purple tint, the S24 Ultra has a yellow tint, and the S25 Ultra is astoundingly close to real-life colors. However, all of these are far brighter than real life because I'm using night mode. In reality, here's how dark it was to my eyes, so keep that in mind as we go through the rest of these photos. Stepping up to the 1x zoom lens, things change a bit with the S23 Ultra being the brightest, but it smears the slide and wood chips like a Bob Ross painting. But there's no happy accidents here, this just doesn't look good. The S24 Ultra still has a bit of that yellow tint, but keeps a bit more detail in the slide and wood chips. And the S25 Ultra keeps even more detail in the slide and wood chips. At 3x zoom, the extra detail on the S25 Ultra is becoming more obvious. At 5x zoom, the S24 Ultra is starting to look like garbage, and the S23 Ultra is way over brightening the photo. And at 10x zoom, we can see a tremendous amount of extra detail on the S25 Ultra. Besides low-light photos of stationary objects, the S25 Ultra also gets a big advantage with low-light photos of moving objects like these cars. The S25 Ultra has much less blurring compared to the S24 Ultra in every single photo. Taking a look at a super low light video, the S25 Ultra comes ahead again with more detail in the playset and far more accurate colors. All of these devices are capable of getting great photos of the stars with the Astrophoto option in the Expert RAW mode, but the S25 Ultra seems to handle brighter skies better. So if there's a full moon or there's a lot of light pollution, the S25 Ultra will get a better star photo. All three phones can also take star time lapses. That detail doesn't really matter for this comparison, but I just wanted an excuse to share this cool shot with you guys. And of course, all three devices can still take pretty good moon photos, all of which have varying brightnesses. And the S23 Ultra has a bit more yellowing, but it can occasionally get that wider shot with enough tries. When it comes to focus speed, all three devices are pretty closely matched in both bright and dark environments, so this certainly won't be a reason to upgrade. And the same is true for the shutter speed. There haven't been any meaningful upgrades in this department either. When it comes to video stabilization, all three phones perform very similarly with both walking and running with both the 0.6x zoom and 1x zoom cameras. And if you don't mind dropping down to QHD resolution, you can enable super steady mode on all three phones, which will make them even more stable. But regardless, the stabilization is so similar that it's certainly not a reason to upgrade. The S25 Ultra now has high dynamic range video recording on by default. This is commonly referred to as HDR, and it allows the phone to capture a dramatically wider range of brightness levels and colors. But you also need an HDR capable screen to actually see the difference. Fortunately, all three of these phones have just that. However, if I just uploaded HDR content to YouTube and you don't have an HDR screen, the images would look like this to you, which is why I'll be using my tablet to show you the results instead. This will let everyone get a pretty good idea of what the differences actually are, even if you're watching on an old CRT. And by the way, it took me over 8 hours of trying tons of different approaches to be able to show you guys the HDR differences, since it's not as simple as just transferring all the videos over to the tablet. So if you appreciate the amount of time I take to make sure I give you guys the most complete comparison, please drop a comment down below letting me know why you think the S25 Ultra is or isn't worth the upgrade. And if you know anyone that would benefit from seeing this comparison, sharing the video with them would trigger the YouTube algorithm to show this video to more people and really help me out. Alright, let's dive into the results. Right here I have a still image from the S23 Ultra and S24 Ultra in standard dynamic range, so there's no HDR turned on at all. This is what you'll get by default on those devices. And it looks pretty good, but when you compare it to an HDR 10 video, the difference is dramatic. The image is way brighter, and the colors far more accurately represent what you're going to see in real life. But there's more to the story here, because you can jump into the settings on the S23 and S24 Ultra to enable HDR10 plus video recording. Comparing those videos shows an even brighter image on the older phones, and that's because the Plus in HDR10 Plus captures extra data compared to regular HDR10, which is what the S25 Ultra is recording in. But wait, there's more. The S25 Ultra can also enable HDR10 Plus if you install the Camera Assistant app from the Samsung Galaxy Store, go into the camera settings, then the Camera Assistant settings, then tap the HDR10 Plus toggle. Doing this makes all three phones capture very similar looking video. But wait, there's even more. I noticed that on particularly high contrast scenes like this snow scene here, HDR10 Plus starts to butcher what it actually looks like in real life. More specifically, any darker colors get really dark, like far darker than they are in real life, but the bright objects like the snow are true to life on the S25 Ultra. In this example here, the S23 Ultra is actually the most accurate when it comes to the color of the slide, but it's still not quite right. If I switch back to just regular HDR10 on the S25 Ultra, I finally get true to life colors. So my recommendation is to not enable HDR10 Plus on the S25 Ultra and just use the regular HDR mode that's on by default. And if you have an S23 or S24 Ultra, or maybe you're going to be getting one of these, I only recommend using HDR10 Plus on scenes that don't have really bright and really dark areas in the same scene. As long as you stay away from these really high contrast scenes with HDR10 Plus, you're going to get an excellent video. The next big improvement to the S25 Ultra's camera is found in the More menu, then in Pro Video mode. You'll see a new option in the upper right corner called Log. If you enable this, you'll film in log format, and this will give you a really flat video that you can fully customize the colors of later on. So if you're familiar with color grading, this is an excellent feature that lets you really fine-tune exactly how your video is going to look. And a quick bonus tip with log mode, if you jump into your settings, then advanced video options, then tap log, you can enable the log option in regular video mode as well. So now if I back out of here and jump into regular video mode, you'll see the log option there. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that the S25 Ultra no longer has Bluetooth support with its S Pen. And if we jump into the S Pen settings, then into the Air Actions menu on either the S23 or S24 Ultra, we can see exactly what's going to be missing on the S25 Ultra. Most notably, you'll no longer be able to use your S Pen to do things like take pictures or control your media by holding the S Pen button down and doing different gestures. You also won't get useful shortcuts like switching to a different pen type in the Samsung Notes app. But it's not all bad news because there are solutions for most of these missing functions, especially if you have something like a Galaxy Watch, because in that case, you get most of the features that were special with the Bluetooth functionality in the S Pen right on your watch. If I back out of this Air Actions menu, you'll see that the rest of the S Pen functionality is identical between the two devices. So that means you can still do things like write in text boxes and have it automatically converted to digital text, take notes with your screen off, or use things like the magnify feature to hover over your screen and magnify text. And I can't cover everything the S Pen can do in this video because that would be a ridiculously long video, and I've actually already made a video like that you can check out by clicking the card above if you're interested. And I'm sure somebody's wondering if you could take the Bluetooth S Pen and put it in the new phone, and while it does technically fit most of the way, it doesn't actually click all the way and it kind of sticks out on the bottom, you won't be able to have any of the Bluetooth functionality because that's taken out of the software itself. When it comes to software differences, there's actually a ton thanks to One UI 7 on the S25 Ultra. In fact, it took a nearly 30-minute video just to cover all the new One UI 7 features, then another 15-minute video to show the extra features that were added when the S25 Ultra was released. And you can check those videos out by clicking the card above or the links in the description. So since I've already done those deep dives, I'm just going to cover some of the highlight new features in this video. Alright, I just tried filming some of the features and realized that these all wobble a ton when I'm trying to get through the interface. So I'm going to put some cases on these and then I'll show you the features. There we go, that is much better. Alright, so one of the first things you're going to notice when you get the Galaxy S25 Ultra is that the notification shade is entirely different. Previously, you'd have all of your quick toggles and your brightness setting at the very top of the notification shade, but now it's actually on the right side when you pull down instead of on the left side, so they're just kind of split, but you can swipe back and forth between them if you'd like. But if you prefer having the notifications and quick toggles combined, you can still change that back on the S25 Ultra by tapping the little pencil icon, tapping panel settings, then tapping the together option. If I back out of here and tap done, and pull my notification shade down again, you'll see that it now matches the previous style. Another big change is to the app screen. On the previous devices, you had a horizontally scrolling app screen, but on the S25 Ultra, it's now a vertical scrolling app screen, and there's a little bar on the side, and if you drag up and down it, you can jump right to a specific letter. And just like with the notification shade, you can still swap this back by tapping these three dots in the bottom right corner, tapping sort, and switching to custom order. And that gives you that horizontal option again. But the only problem here is that you can't sort this alphabetically automatically. You are actually going to have to long press and move the applications around as needed. Previously, you could just tap the three dots and sort either alphabetically in this horizontal scrolling option or a custom order like what you get here on the S25 Ultra. If you use app folders on your home screen, you can now long press them and tap enlarge, and that'll give you a larger version of that folder. But what's really useful about this is that you can actually tap the application directly and jump straight into it. And of course, you can always long press it again and shrink it back down if you prefer. There's a new bar that appears at the bottom of your lock screen on the S25 Ultra called the Now bar. And this will show things like your active timers, active workouts, or even real-time sports scores. The Now bar is also at the top of your screen for quick access. Just tap it and you can swipe through all the active tiles. You also get a new widget called Now Brief, and what this does is give you a summary of your day. This includes things like the weather, your energy score, your previous night's sleep score, and if you tap the settings on the bottom right, then tap Content to Include, you can customize what you want it to show. And there are a lot of different things to pick from. If you long press on the lock screen, then unlock your phone, you get a lot more customizability for things like your clock. Like it can get much larger and move into a larger area on the S25 Ultra. On the previous devices, you could make it a little bit bigger, and you couldn't move it down at all. It was just kind of stuck there at the top. There's a new AI Select tool, which is similar to Smart Select on the previous devices, but it's much more content aware when you select something. So as you can see on the S25 Ultra, it automatically selected the text, but on the S24 Ultra, it didn't do that at all. It just kind of drew a box around it. And if I wanted to select the text, I'd have to tap this T icon, then it would select the text. AI Assist also gives you quick access to content-related tools. And since I selected some text, this is going to open up Writing Assist. And if this was text in an email or a text message, I'd be able to change things like the writing style, or if it's a really long body of text that I just selected, I could just tap Summarize to get a shortened version of it. And tapping in another area gives me different content-related tools. Samsung also made a huge upgrade to Sketch to Image on the S25 Ultra, and they call it Drawing Assist. So while you do still get a drawing option, you can also now just take an existing photo and turn it into one of these types of art styles. Or you could tap this text option, type out something super random, select the animation style, and tap Generate. And that'll give you the exact crazy thing that you typed in. This is actually a really impressive tool. If you've ever recorded a video when it was really windy out and the wind is just really overpowering your voice in the video, you can actually remove that wind sound now on the S25 Ultra. Just navigate to the video and tap this star icon at the bottom, and that'll bring up something called Audio Eraser. This will allow you to isolate things like voices, wind, nature, and noise, and either increase or decrease the levels of those sounds. And I'm still just scratching the surface on everything that's new on the S25 Ultra compared to the previous generation devices. However, some of the new features will be coming to the S23 and S24 Ultra when they get the One UI 7 update. So while some of these new features are pretty awesome, they aren't necessarily a reason to upgrade. At least not until we know for sure what is and isn't going to make it to the previous devices. One more change that was first introduced on the S24 Ultra, but is worth pointing out, is the upgraded always-on display. Right now, all three of these displays are technically off, but they still show you useful information like the date and time. The S24 and S25 Ultra take this further by putting your wallpaper as a part of the always-on display as well. Previously, you only had the option of this black background. And what's really cool is that if you have a video background and you tap to wake your screen, that video is going to continue playing from where it left off. Something that's unique to the S25 Ultra is that the Now bar is also available on the always-on display, and that lets you quickly see things like timers without having to turn the display on. So now for the big question. Is the S25 Ultra worth the upgrade? Well, if you have an S23 Ultra or older device, and the Bluetooth functionality of the S Pen isn't a must-have for you, then this is a pretty compelling buy. You'll get a significantly brighter screen that's capable of more vibrant video playback, and has an anti-reflective layer that makes a tremendous difference in visibility under direct sunlight. You also get a huge jump in processor performance, noticeably better battery life when doing light tasks like watching videos, better speakers, much better ultra-wide and long zoom photos, better low-light photo and video performance, an HDR mode that works better than the S23 Ultra's HDR10 Plus recording, and of course, some of the brand new software features. Combine all of this with the fact that I have a link on the video and in the description and pinned comment to a huge limited time trade-in and bundle deal, and it's a pretty easy recommendation. And those links are affiliate links, so if you want to support the channel at no extra cost to you, using those links is a great way to do it. Upgrading from the S24 Ultra is a much tougher sell. Sure, the S25 Ultra speakers sound better, you can edit videos faster and play games at higher frame rates for longer. The HDR video mode works better on the S25 Ultra. The low light photos are also noticeably better. You get much better 100x zoom photos. The display is slightly larger in the same form factor. You get rounded corners, which are a bit more comfortable to hold. You get some new software features. And you get those great trade-in deals that I mentioned a moment ago. But you do trade some scratch resistance for shadow resistance, and that may not be worth it for some of you. I feel like upgrading from the S24 Ultra has more to do with FOMO than getting a big upgrade. So it's up to you if these changes and the current deals are worth it to you. And if you want to see 30 brand new features on the S25 Ultra, you can check out this video here. And consider subscribing if you don't want to miss more deep dive S25 Ultra coverage. That's it for this tech episode. Jesus loves you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one.